Around October of 2005, I was working as a counselor in a state group home. The building that housed the group home was a former tuberculosis hospital. Actually, it was the building where the nurses and doctors stayed while they were working at the hospital. When I first started working at the group home years before, I was told the building was haunted. I figured that everyone was just messing with the new guy. I quickly found out that the building was in fact haunted, as I had several experiences in that building from my first night on. The particular incident that I'm writing about here is one that still causes chills to run up my spine. It was probably about 7 or 8 p.m. that night. All of the youth that were at our group home were out with staff raking leaves. They did this sometimes to make money while they were there. I was the only person in the building. The building had 2 main floors and a basement, and my office was on the top floor. Since it was so late, I decided to go home for the evening, as there was nobody there to need my assistance. I locked up my office and headed down the stairs towards the main landing. As I reached the main floor landing, I noticed that my shadow on the wall continued down towards the basement. I thought it was pretty cool that my shadow actually looked like it was going down into the basement. I stepped back up the steps to try to make my shadow do this again. This is when I realized that I didn't have a shadow on the wall. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and I got chills all over. I got out of there quick and went down the fire escape to my car. The following day, it was all I could do to force myself to go to work. It was a long time before I was able to stay in the building by myself again. I still wonder if the people using the building now ever have any experiences. I can't say for sure that what I saw was a ghost, but when you understand the full story behind it and the sheer coincidence of what happened, then you can't deny that it's pretty strange. I was with my friend, driving around doing deliveries for his dad's takeaway shop. It was one of the last orders of the night, around 2 a.m., and we got to talking about his old house that was in the area. His mom said that she had experienced strange things in the house, items being moved, lights turning on when nobody was home, etc. His sister, however, claims to have had a very bizarre encounter. She was playing in her room when she was about 10 years old when a little girl dropped from the ceiling and landed a few feet in front of her. She then flew across the room towards her before falling through the floor, disappearing. The final straw came when his mom was doing some ironing and popped upstairs for a few minutes. When she came down, the iron had been placed face down on the board and the fabric was starting to smoke. That freaked her out a lot because she had found out from the neighbors that a little girl had died in their house in a fire years before. Understandably, she didn't want to live there anymore. My friend had just finished telling that story when, by pure coincidence, we drove up next to his old house that he had just been talking about. I knew he wasn't lying because he had pointed out the same house a few times before on separate occasions. He was delivering to a house a few doors down, so he parked directly outside of it. He froze, staring at his old home. He looked shocked, and I asked him what was up, and he said, "Do you not see the little girl?" I looked again, and in the downstairs living room window was a face staring at us, very white and doll-like. I actually had seen it before, but I was sure it was a doll, so I didn't think anything of it. It didn't look alive. I laughed and said, "It's not a little girl." But he was certain it was. No lights were on in the house, so it was pitch black in the living room. We continued to look at the face until it slowly backed away from the window and the blinds fell back into place. I was completely speechless. I felt stupid for even thinking it was a doll, but I don't have the best eyesight. The fact that he had just finished telling me the story of what had happened in that house convinced us that what we both saw was a ghost. It could have been a coincidence, and it was just a little girl in a dark room in the middle of the night, but that's pretty unlikely. When I got married 5 years ago, I moved into my husband's house in Wenatchee, Washington. One night, about a month after we got married, we went to bed around 11 p.m. I laid down next to my husband and put my head on his shoulder. The nightstand light next to him was still on, and within 30 seconds of me resting on my shoulder, I heard a woman sigh deeply. It was as loud and real as if she was right next to me in the same location as my husband. I was startled, and I sat up and asked my husband if he had heard it. He said that he did, but he didn't seem bothered by it like I was and went back to trying to fall asleep. My husband worked at a job in which a couple nights a week he had to work all night until 8 a.m. One night when he was away working, about a couple weeks after we heard the sigh, I again went to bed around 11 p.m. I decided to lay on his side of the bed. I had the light on to read and had just settled in when I heard the woman sigh in my ear again, like she was right next to me. It sounded identical to the first time I heard it. I was alone in the house, and it scared me so much that I kept the light on all night. When I told my husband about hearing the sighing again, he told me that before he bought the house, an old woman had lived there. She was disabled and stayed in bed for years before she eventually died in that room. I didn't hear the sigh again, and we had to move out a couple months later. I've often wondered if the next occupants have had the same experience. I work in a nursing home, and due to HIPAA regulations, I will not include names or my location. We have a ghost man that is seen during periods of death. What I mean by periods of death is usually we have residents die in sets of 3, 6, 9, and occasionally 12. It's unfortunate and scary, but when our resident angel of death that we refer to as the man in the brown suit is seen, I can't help but get an extremely uneasy feeling. Sometimes he is seen by the person who passes, but usually he's seen by people who don't. He's always described as a male with white hair wearing a brown suit, hat, and tie. The residents that see him are very frightened. Normally, he simply passes by their room and looks at them. Occasionally, it has been reported that he comes out of the closet or through the wall, or has simply been sitting in a chair in their room. Once, he asked a resident what the time was. Another time, a blind woman described him in detail. I wouldn't have believed it had I not already heard the stories. He is seen during all hours of the day, but most often at night. However, every time he is reported as being seen, someone passes away. Nurses and CNAs have seen him as well. They'll see him walk into a room, but when they go to investigate, nobody is there. I have personally seen a shadow in the corner of my eye, but it disappears when I turn around to look. For that, I am thankful because I really don't want to see him. I would probably quit. I just wonder who he is and what he wants. It's creepy. Could he really be taking people to the other side?